This content is AI generated for informational purposes only and should not be directly used for clinical decision-making.
Hello and welcome back to the Neurosurgery Hub podcast. I'm Dr. Aris, Senior Attending Neurosurgeon.
And I'm Dr. Alara, Research Fellow. Today we're looking at a fascinating new study from the Journal of Neurology, published in 2026, titled No Link Between Piriform Cortex Subregion Resection and Seizure Freedom in Two Cohorts with Temporal Lobe Epilepsy.
This is a paper that I think is going to spark a lot of discussion in our morning rounds, and certainly in the epilepsy surgery community. For years, we've been operating under a specific narrative regarding the piriform cortex, this small, three-layered primary olfactory cortex. Alara, before we dive into the data, remind our listeners why we've been so focused on the piriform cortex lately.
Right. Historically, about 1/3 of focal epilepsy patients are drug-resistant. For temporal lobe epilepsy, or TLE, we offer either a standard anterior temporal lobe resection, ATLR, or a selective amygdalo-hippocampectomy, SAHE. While these are effective, we still only see long-term seizure freedom in about 50 to 70% of cases.
Exactly. And because of that gap, researchers have been looking for critical nodes in the epileptogenic network. The piriform cortex became a prime suspect. Rodent and monkey studies showed it was highly susceptible to kindling and chemoconvulsants. In humans, EEG fMRI experiments showed it's functionally activated during epileptogenic discharges.
And that led to several influential retrospective studies, most notably starting around 2019, which suggested that the extent of resection of the ipsilateral piriform cortex was significantly associated with favorable seizure outcomes. It basically became a mantra: if you want seizure freedom, make sure you get enough of the piriform.
But this new study by Zonard and colleagues seems to challenge that mantra directly. They looked at this association using a more refined methodology. Alara, walk us through their study design.
They used a two-step approach. First, they had a discovery cohort of 28 patients from a single center, with a heterogeneous mix of etiologies, all with at least 1 year of follow-up. But the real strength is their validation cohort, which included 305 patients, 205 of whom had hippocampal sclerosis.
That's a massive jump in sample size compared to previous studies. What really caught my eye was how they defined the piriform cortex. In the older studies, they used manual segmentation, which is prone to investigator bias. How did this group handle it?
That's the deep dive part of this paper. They used an investigator-independent, connectivity-based segmentation to define the piriform subregions. They registered postoperative images to preoperative T1-weighted scans to precisely measure what was resected. They also performed a manual segmentation for a direct head-to-head comparison to see if the manual approach was where the discrepancy lived.
And they used ILAA Class 1 as their primary outcome, true seizure freedom. What did they find in the discovery cohort?
In that initial group of 28 patients, they found no significant association with ILAA outcome and the extent of resection within either the manually or automatically defined piriform cortex.
Now, some might say, well, it's only 28 patients, but they didn't stop there.
Exactly. They moved to that validation cohort of 305 patients. They performed extensive analyses and even used voxel-based lesion outcome mapping, or VLSM, using logistic regression. This is a very robust way to see if there's a specific sweet spot in the brain where resection leads to seizure freedom.
And the result?
Again, nothing. No significant association with ILAA Class 1 outcome, not in the piriform cortex, and interestingly, not even in other mesiotemporal regions they analyzed. The resected proportions of specific structures just didn't correlate with success in the way previous papers claimed.
That's a bit of a bombshell for the residents listening who've been taught to extend their resections medially to catch that piriform area. Why do we think this study found the opposite of those previous reports?
The authors suggest a few reasons. One is the segmentation method. Earlier work used manual segmentations that were often truncated at the lemon insulae and tended to overlap with the amygdala. By using connectivity-defined subregions, this study might be providing a more anatomically accurate picture of what we are actually resecting.
It's also worth noting the functional role of the piriform cortex. It's involved in odor identification, odor-related memory, and even spatial navigation. While previous studies didn't find major cognitive deficits or increased rates of psychosis or anxiety after piriform resection, it's still a functional area.
And from a surgical safety perspective, the paper reminds us that the piriform cortex is very close to the middle cerebral artery, so we're taking a real vascular risk if we're aggressively pursuing a resection that might not actually improve seizure outcomes.
Let's talk about the VLSM results again, because for the neurosurgeons listening, this is a powerful tool. Voxel-based lesion outcome mapping essentially looks at every resected voxel across 305 patients and asks, if this voxel is gone, is the patient more likely to be seizure-free? When that comes back negative for the piriform cortex, it's a very strong signal that we might be overestimating its role as a universal critical node.
Right. The authors conclude that piriform cortex resection should be considered on an individualized basis rather than routinely incorporated into every temporal lobe resection.
This is a classic example of the reproducibility crisis, or simply the evolution of surgical science. We had a few studies with smaller cohorts or different manual methods that suggested a strong link. Now, with 300-plus patients and more objective connectivity-based mapping, that link is disappearing.
It also brings up the idea of the epileptogenic network. The paper mentions that recurring seizures might be due to our lack of understanding of the individual organization of a patient's network, which could extend to the orbitofrontal or singular cortices, rather than just being a matter of did you or did you not take the piriform.
For the residents, does this mean we don't resect the piriform? No, but it means we shouldn't feel compelled to chase it as a silver bullet for seizure freedom. The outcome seems to be much more complex than the volume of a single 3-layered structure.
The study is quite definitive in its conclusion. They state the result was robust across cohorts, across piriform definitions, and across analytical approaches.
It's a sobering reminder that in neurosurgery, the more we learn, the more we realize how much we don't know about these networks. Before we wrap up, Alara, any other technical details from the paper that we should highlight?
I think the emphasis on the investigator-independent nature of their segmentation is the key takeaway for the researchers in our audience. It removes the human element of finding what you're looking for when you manually trace a postoperative cavity. They also used postoperative T1 scans registered to preoperative ones, which is the gold standard for this kind of volumetric analysis.
Excellent. Well, this definitely gives us a lot to think about before our next temporal lobectomy. To summarize for our listeners, this 2026 study in the Journal of Neurology found no association between the extent of piriform cortex resection and seizure freedom in TLE across 2 different cohorts, including a large validation set of over 300 patients.
It challenges the recent trend of routine piriform resection and suggests we need to stay focused on individualized network assessment.
Thanks for joining us on the Neurosurgery Hub podcast. I'm Dr. Aris.
And I'm Dr. Alara. We'll see you in the next episode.
Keep operating with precision and questioning the dogmas. Goodbye.